Greetings and welcome to Mz.Rootz online education sessions. For the next few sessions, we're going to be completing the modules outlined in your course content checklist. The first module outlines that you will be able to use historical references to study Africa. The three learning objectives that we are going to be covering in this session are the ability to identify the purpose of using a timeline when studying history. By the end of the session, you'll also be able to describe the key terms used when studying history. And finally, you will be able to compare and contrast events occurring in Europe and Africa. How many of you are downloading the free resources? Put your hands up. I need to know. How many of you have actually downloaded the Asian African timeline, the checklist? Let me know. This week I have uploaded, I think, 4 or 5 documents that I have designed for you. So let me know if they're working and if you like them. For this session, you may need a book, journal, folder and pen. Remember, it would be beneficial to have a selection of pens with a range of colours to help retain that knowledge. You will also need your course content checklist. This was downloadable in formal lesson 1 entitled Changing the Narrative. So if you haven't already downloaded your course content checklist, go over to your formal lesson 1. The link is within the description box. Select the link and that document is yours. You will also need the Asian African History Studies timeline. Again, this is available in your formal lesson 1. Again, in the description box, the link is there. Press the link, that timeline is yours. I also highly recommend, if you haven't already, that you create yourself an electronic folder for all of your documents to be downloaded and centralized into one efficient place. For this session, you will need to download a document called Personal Timeline, the document called Timeline Question Worksheet, a third document called Asian African History Specialist Terms, and the final worksheet called His Story, My Story Worksheet. All of these documents are available for download. The link is in the description box, clearly laid out. Download and centralize into your electronic folder. I want to start off by thanking all of my subscribers. Last week was really positive week. I got an amazing response from the session entitled Mz.Rootz Critically Thinking About Education. The comment section was superb and exactly what I imagined. This is the only way that anything can develop, through dialogue. It's an absolute natural process, so we learn from each other. So thank you for everybody that engaged with last week's sessions, and let's continue to build, let's continue to learn from each other, and I will continue to provide you with these free resources. My subscription level reached 70 subscribers last week. This is like a small school, so I'm over the moon. Like, this is 2 or 3 classes in a building. So that goes to show me the amount of people that potentially are learning and engaging with the sessions, and an absolute motivation for me to continue. What is time? Have you ever asked yourself that? What is time? Time is an absolute abstract concept. When I say abstract, I mean that you can perceive it to be anything you like. Yeah? Time is space. Time is energy. But you know, in this Western world that we're living in, time is money. Tick-tock. For many years, I've refused to wear a watch because I refuse to live my day by checking this time. To me, it's like counting down the day, counting down my life, living by this object on my hand. That's not time. To me, time is the most precious and valuable commodity. Without time, we have nothing. The ancient versions of us used to look up at the sky, and that's how they measured time. They realised that there were patterns occurring throughout the seasons, throughout the years, throughout the decades, throughout the millennia even. They looked at the sun and the positioning of the stars, and from these identifications were able to decipher when to plant seeds, when it was time to plant a specific seed, because it was all about food and survival. They used the stars to work out what direction things were in. So the moon and the sun are significant symbols of how we in ancient times used to measure time. So it begs to question, is time about seasons? Is time about what happens to the earth when it's going around in its orbit? Again, I've said it already, it's an abstract concept, but I think it's a beautiful way to consider time when you're using the nature. The things that we can see but can't touch. But we realise that there's a pattern occurring, and certain things happen when we're aligned in the cosmos with certain aspects of our being. Not everywhere in the world measures time in the same way though. So we in the Western Hemisphere, we have a 24-hour clock. We follow a calendar that has 12 months. Yeah, we know that February, its days fluctuate depending on whether we're in a leap year or not. So that's how we do things in the West, and I've said it sessions before, but it's all to contribute to this capitalist system that we're living in. So here, time literally is money, and we're utilising time to ensure that we're generating as much capital as possible to pump back into this society. So that's how the powers that be are utilising our time here. The calendar that we use here in the Western society is called the Gregorian Calendar. This calendar was put together by Pope Gregory in 1582, where he revised and manipulated the Julian calendar, which was the calendar we used before, as it was ordered by the Greeks. So we know Julian is a Greek name, and at the time we were under the rule of Julius Caesar. Countries under dominion of the Roman Catholic Church accepted this calendar straight away, but many countries opposed, including the Soviet Union and Greece. But all countries conformed by 1923. Apart from Ethiopia, who remains free of any colonial powers and free from any influence of the Roman Catholic Church. They have managed to stick to their ancient traditions and their notions of time. Did you know that Ethiopia is 7 to 8 years behind us? Their calendar is intertwined with ancient biblical scriptures. Their calendar starts with the idea that Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden for 7 years. The Bible says that God promised to save them after 5,500 years. The Gregorian and the Ethiopian calendar use Jesus Christ's birthday as a starting point. But the difference is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church believes that the birth of Christ was 7 BC. This is 5,500 years after God promised to Adam and Eve. Arabia is another part of the world that measures time differently. They use lunar cycles or phases of the moon. Let's start off with a warm-up exercise. Get that critical mind working. You should have downloaded your My Personal Timeline document. This is how the document looks when you download it. Now, I have emphasized that you can either complete this document electronically or you can print it and handwrite in. Either way, doesn't matter, as long as you participate. How it works is, and I'll read it to you, it's asking that you please complete the timeline. It states that this timeline should show how events in your life have impacted who you are today. So it's critical, but it's also reflective, which is vital for your growth, that you look back in order to move forward. So, this is when I was born. Yeah. This box here highlights the middle of my life so far. And this box here states approximately my age today. Okay. Now these are key events that have occurred during this era, if you like. So between the age 0 to 20, I accessed schooling. Then I had my first child. Then in my early 20s, I really began to travel with my children. And heading up now towards the age that I am, I'm going to state that I've established my profession. It took all that time for me to really establish what it is I want to do professionally with my life. Okay? So can you see how one event has had a knock-on effect to the next event? One event has impacted the next event, literally in a pattern. And each of these events have been choices that I have made. The schooling, obviously it's by law, you have to go to school. But it was my choice how much I decided to interact with the opportunities that schooling presented. So ultimately, the grades that I left with was my choice. Yeah? It's also my choice to have children. And because I had children, I decided that I wanted them to see the world. So even though I was traveling as a young person, you know, my parents taking me on holidays to Jamaica, etc., etc., I really began to see the world with my children, because I wanted to show them more. Now, the travelling really inspired my profession. So yours will be different. I mean, maybe some negative things happened in your life, and it had a positive impact on the choice you made next. For instance, if you went to prison, what happened next? What choice did you make next? Maybe you was in one career and you decided that no, it's time to change. I don't like this career. So you made a step into a new chapter of your life by making a choice. I hope I'm making sense. The box that's highlighted here enables you to detail what happened during that time of your life. So for instance, schooling, you would put something like from the age of 5 to 16, I achieved my GCSEs. Yeah? Or, for me, I did A-levels. So, I would put from the age of 5 to 18, I achieved my, and actually GCSEs should be capital, and went on to do A-levels. You could be you could be as detailed as you like. You can detail the GCSEs you took. You can detail the A-levels you took. Here, you can continue the story, and actually what you'll get is a picture, a narrative of your life, a timeline of your snippets of vital events in your life. This activity embeds your literacy or English, and if you have decided to use the electronic document, it also embeds ICT skills, because you are actually now word processing. It also enables your reflectivity and the ability to think ahead. Let me know what you think about this activity. Is it good? Did it work for you? Did you like it? Would you use it? Let me know. What do you know about history? What do you know about Black history? Before you answer these questions, now would be a good time for you to download, if you haven't already, the worksheet called Ancient African History Specialist Terms Worksheet. This is what it looks like, and it's asking you, what do these words mean? It states, draw a line to match specialist terms to each corresponding definition. This worksheet is designed to ensure that you know some key terms that will be used throughout this course. Key terms that are used regularly when studying ancient African history. So this is aimed at building your vocabulary word bank. So please download. If you don't know the answers, use a dictionary, use the internet to clarify, and you draw a line from the key term to its definition. Which one is it? Which one? So back to the question I asked. What do you know about history? What do you know about Black history? Well, let's start off by saying history and Black history should not be separated. History occurred in one linear event. It shouldn't be separated, and I think that's where we've gone wrong. Different things happened in different parts of the world at the same time, but actually there is no such thing as European history and Black history, because each event had a knock-on consequence to the other. So whatever was happening in Europe had an adverse effect on what happened in Africa, and vice versa. Everything is connected. Okay, so let's have a look at this African history timeline. You should have downloaded this in your first session, the formal session 1. But this outlines a bit more detail regarding time, because that is the focus of this session. And I think what scares a lot of people when they begin to study history is in their heads they cannot fathom time, because it is an abstract concept. But here we aim to simplify the notion. So I'm going to outline that this emboldened black line here emphasizes what ancient historians would have called after Christ. So this number 1 here emphasizes when Jesus Christ was born, okay? When we began to actually start recording history in a more efficient and well-documented manner, if you like, okay? But what always gets me excited is look at the time here when Jesus Christ was born compared to some of the history and evidence that we have found in Africa here. Look at all that time that occurred before the birth of Jesus Christ. So what was happening on the continent then? To me, when I look at history, humans almost took a darker turn in their existence after this period here. Now, as you know, this is a non-religious platform, so we don't call this period here after Christ. We call it ACE, after Common Era. And before this, base, before Common Era. And as I say, it's quite a fantastic time in history where developments were beautiful and birthed the civilizations that we see today. Along the side here, we've got almost like a numerical reference. This is where we're embedding some numeracy here, some maths. Here you can start to see what the abbreviations mean. So where we've put M means million. We can also see that the K means the millenniums. Half of the millenniums are established here. And we know that centuries mean hundreds. Decades are counted up in tens. And years are annual, which goes up in ones. Yeah? According to the Gregorian Calendar. Right? So this timeline is based on the Gregorian Calendar, which, if you've listened to Mz.Rootz critiquing time, you'll understand that that was created by a pope, yeah, in the 19th century. As you can see, from this period here onwards, there's only been a couple of millennium. That really is a short period of time compared to all this time here. I ask myself, what has happened during the past couple of millenniums? What has happened to our existence? What has happened to the world compared to all these millenniums here? My job is to try and help you establish connections. So we're using this measurement of time for you to be able to start critically thinking about history and when events occurred. And because we have been living in a calendar based on the Gregorian mindset, it may be the most simplest version of time that will help you comprehend what has actually happened in our lifetimes and in the lifetimes before. And in your mind's eye, you can begin to measure existence. If you haven't already, go to the description box and download this worksheet called African Timeline Question Sheets. Now, this is to check your knowledge on some of the vocabulary and some of the abbreviations used on our timeline. Again, it's designed to embed literacy and enable your written and reading abilities. So it looks like this. You can print it, or you can do it electronically. And it's asking quite simple questions. What is a timeline? When is it used? And then it's asking you to complete the following table by filling in the definitions. Now, some of the terms I have belatedly spoke about in the timeline presentation. But some of them you're going to have to do your own research, like this one, AD. Didn't tell you what that meant. I'll give you a little hint now. It's Latin. I want you to find out the definition. BC, I want the definition. And so on. Okay? Complete that activity to build on your knowledge. What is his story? His story. He's European. It's a story about him and has been written by them, and it's not really from our perspective. What is my story? It's quite often a mystery, and it's African and told by Africans from an African perspective. Let's draw some comparisons. Some of these events happened simultaneously at the same time, and some of them happened as a consequence of another. Let me go into a bit more detail. When Europe was experiencing an ice age, Africa simultaneously at the same time never, ever, ever experienced any ice age. We always had a tropical climate. What would have been the effects of that? Think critically. The European evolved into a Neanderthal. So when they left the continent of Africa, they adapted to the conditions of the Ice Age, and their bodies changed to deal with the harsh environmental realities of living in the Northern Hemisphere. Whereas simultaneously, the Africans that stayed, the tribes that stayed by the equator on the continent, had no need to evolve and remained living by the rivers and evolved into what we know today as the Homo sapien. Are you following me so far? Let me know. In Europe, we know of ancient philosophers in Greece and Rome, but they could have only occurred after the ancient philosophers of ancient Ethiopia and Egypt. And actually, history shows us that the Greeks and the Romans came to the continent and learn from these ancient scholars. So, people like Aristotle, who was considered a huge philosopher and impacted modern day mindset, cannot compare to the likes of people like Imhotep. Again, history shows us that Aristotle went to the continent and learnt from these ancient Egyptians. The Dark Ages, which occurred in Europe, which we're aware of, where there was famine, disease, due to lack of hygiene and lack of knowledge and connection to who they were. Europe underwent a serious Dark Age. We know that the ancient Moors went into Europe and actually had an impact on erasing the Dark Age by teaching them and showing them a lifestyle. Napoleon, a French general that went around the world colonizing certain parts of Africa and the Caribbean, so turning these countries and islands into French property. The equivalent, and should I say at the same time, of Napoleon's existence, we had Toussaint, who was a Haitian revolutionist who did not allow for his island of Haiti, or country of Haiti, to become colonized by the French. Now, I hope you can see that the examples I have given you have occurred in almost chronological order. So it literally is going down in an order of from beginning, coming more towards today. Yeah, I'll try to simplify it for you. So we spoke about Napoleon and Toussaint of Haiti. Let's look at post-slavery now. So we begin to look at some geniuses that came out of slavery, and in particular some African Americans. I know that Thomas Edison and Alexander Bell are renowned for their inventions, the light bulb and the telephone. But what's untold or not common knowledge is the geniuses Glenville, Woods and Latimer. Without these two Americans, African Americans, these two inventions would never have occurred. G. Woods held over 60 patents. He was a self-taught mechanical engineer, and he had mastered the art of controlling the flow of electricity. Latimer was the ancestor who designed the filament that allowed for light to continue burning constantly. These weren't the only inventions that these two African Americans came up with. They had impacted many inventions throughout this time. Let's talk about Jarrett Morgan. Jarrett Morgan was the man that designed the traffic light system. He also designed a respiratory device, later providing a blueprint for World War I gas masks. Again, not much people know this, but the 1800s, we saw a spike of inventors come out of post-slavery. Ask yourself, why would slaves have been designing and coming up with inventions? Well, if you think about it logically, we create things to make our life easier. So logic shows me that slaves were creating things to make their job easier. This guy here, Jan Matzelinger, he designed a machine called the auto shoe lasting machine. Now this machine was designed for the joining of sole to the upper shoe, and it allowed for mass quantities of shoes to be produced. This increased the availability of shoe and decreased the price of shoe. Up until this point, people were going to the shoemaker and having their shoes individually designed. So this ancestor here birthed the notion of mass production of shoes and would have definitely impacted what we see today as Nike and Adidas shoe production. The last ancestor that I want to talk about is known as the Real Mccoy. Now we throw that around a lot. Is it the Real Mccoy? But do we know where that comes from? It comes from a brother called Elijah McCoy. Again, an engineer. And if it wasn't for him, the railway system wouldn't be the railway system we see today. Because what he had done is he had designed an automatic engine lubricator. Now in the 1800s, the steam trains needed constant lubrication. The engine needed to be kept well oiled, and they would have to stop off to almost re-up and re-oil their engine in order for the train to remain functional. But Elijah McCoy came up with this lubricating system that whilst the train was running, it would automatically lubricate itself, so there was no need for stop-offs. Now, as you can imagine, this made journeys faster, more efficient, and saved money. As you know, the railway system, the transport system, is used to move cargo from one place to another. The trading occurred a lot faster, efficiently, but yet still, very rare do we hear about Elijah McCoy's contribution to trade or transport even. So when we say, is that the Real McCoy? When people were purchasing these engines, they would ask before they made the purchase, is this the Real McCoy? I hope you are empowered by this short activity. If you haven't already, now is a perfect opportunity for you to download the His Story, My Story research activity worksheets. Now, the learning objective is, and I'll read it to you. The intention is for you to develop your research skills. The activity is to compare European history with African history within the same time frame. This should develop your ability to think critically about history. And it goes down and it gives you instructions as to what to do. So it's a research activity and it's pointing you in the direction of the internet and it's asking you to write the answers and complete as many as possible. Okay? It's providing you with useful website links for your extra reading, and it's also providing you with a template within each period of history. So it's asking you to complete the profiles of, for instance, Napoleon and Toussaint. Okay, we have another one here, the Dark Ages and the Moors, and in the 19th century. So you will be comparing European and African history, but more specifically looking closer at Alexander Graham Bell and comparing it with Lewis Howard Latimer. Let me know what you think about these activities. All of these worksheets that are featured in this week's session and every session thereon have been designed and developed by Mz.Rootz for you to develop your knowledge. We are now coming towards the end of this session, but before we conclude, it's time to check your learning. This is a really good stage now for you to consider using your journal, book or folder to document the answers to these questions. So here we go. Are you able to discuss the purpose of using a timeline when studying history? Don't worry if you can't answer these now. That is the benefits of using this type of platform, because you can rewind, pause, revisit to enable you to answer these questions. Can you recall 5 key terms used by people who study ancient African history? Next question. Discuss 3 events that occurred simultaneously in Africa and in Europe. Again, the answers are all within this session. If you're not able to answer these questions now, rewind and revisit. Can you name 3 inventors from the Africa diaspora? Are you able to describe what the stated 3 inventors created? Are you able to discuss how the 3 inventions impacted the world we have today? Again, you can discuss this verbally, or one step better is to write these answers down and journalize your responses. Well done to everybody that has completed this week's session. I am very proud of you. And guess what? You are building on your knowledge. Thank you all for spending time with Mz.Rootz. Remember to subscribe, like, comment and share.